the TUG. This is our April 2024 Accessibility Tableau User Group meetup. We typically run these meetups once a quarter. Our last one was in January. And now we're here together again. It's great to see you all. We have a great agenda for you today. We're going to start with just some welcome and introductions. And then we have a quick preview of some of the accessibility presentations that are going to be coming out at Tableau Conference in just a couple weeks. We have Blake Burgess here to help share that with us. But most of our session today is going to be focused around a presentation and conversation with Frank Elavsky, who I'll introduce in a little bit more depth in a few minutes, but is one of the preeminent practitioners of accessibility and data visualization. So it's really exciting to have Frank here with us today. And I'm really interested to hear what he has to say. All right. So we already had a little bit of a kickoff question in the chat there, but I have another one. So we can see your name already, but if you also want to give us your organization and the last concert you attended. This has nothing to do with data visualization, but I think it's an interesting and fun question to get to know people. So as for myself, my name is Colin. I'm a core consultant with the Information Lab, which is a data visualization and analytics consulting company, partner with Tableau and Alteryx. And the last concert I attended was John Craigie. So if any of you know John Craigie, he's like a folk singer, one of my favorites. And I got to see him when he performed here in New York a couple months ago. Emily, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Kund. I'm one of the co-hosts of, or co-leaders of the Accessibility Tug. And I work for Midnight Sun Technologies. It's an Alaska Native corporation, which is a super cool thing. And I am on a contract to a government agency right now. The last concert I attended, so excited for it. It was The Cure at Meriwether Post Pavilion, and it was amazing.
That's
Thank
awesome.
you for letting me boast about seeing The Cure, which was like a once-in-a-lifetime experience for me.
Anytime, Emily, anytime. Blake and Frank, maybe we can do introductions for you all as well, just in this moment. Blake, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Colin. Hi, everyone. My name is Blake Burgess. I am the product management director for accessibility for Tableau. And the last concert I went to was Matt Nathanson in the Neptune in Seattle.
Nice. What genre is that? I don't know if I've ever heard of him.
Like folk pop.
Nice. What about you, Frank?
So it's funny. I was going to say one of my favorites was actually back when we were in the Northwest. It was in Seattle. I forget the venue, but it was Jarl Bernhoft in 2013, I think, was the last one I went to where it was like just really outstanding, just super good. It was like perfect, wasn't too big. But the actual last one I went to was probably just before the pandemic started. We went to a weird little jazz show in, like, I don't know, the edge of the Napa Valley when we were in the SF area. And it was like, it was awesome. But also, like, there were a bunch of like rich people there. It was like a very weird setting, not something I've ever been to before. And it was like 20 people. So it was like, and we were outsiders. So really weird, but fun. Oh yeah, right. I'm Frank, and I'm from Carnegie Mellon University.
Great, thanks. So the first thing we're going to do is get a little conference preview from Blake. So Blake, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you take over.
Thanks so much. So hi, everyone. I hope everyone's getting excited for TC24. We have some really exciting sessions that I wanted to highlight today. First is a hands-on training with two of our amazing solutions engineers focusing on taking an inaccessible data set and learning how to build an accessible data set. So that will happen twice, once on Monday from 12 to 1:30, and again on Tuesday from 8 a.m. to 9:30. And the location is listed here. Happy to send a copy of this slide across to Colin so that folks don't have to try and take notes, etc. We have a fabulous community member presenting on how to design accessible visualizations after conducting a significant amount of research in this space. She's come up with some ideas on how to make visualizations more accessible and engaging. So that is being presented twice, once on Monday morning from 9:15 to 9:35, and then again on Tuesday from 2:45 to 3:05. And then lastly, I am presenting with a engineer from my team, the amazingly talented Bella Jing, and we're going to talk to you about how we are making visualizations accessible and navigable for everyone. And that is on Tuesday from 1:30 to 1:50 p.m. I did notice that, there are quite a few folks who aren't able to attend TC, and I wanted to make sure that you all don't miss out. And so one of our goals after TC is to take some of this excellent material, like the hands-on training, and turn that into help content so that regardless of whether you can make it to TC or not, you're still able to have those same great aha moments and make your visualizations accessible. And Colin and I are already plotting to do a encore presentation of the Marks navigation presentation for the TUG as well. Again, we want to make sure that everyone is able to have equitable access to accessibility information. So hoping to see everyone at TC, and if not, don't worry, we've got you covered, and we will make sure that you get all of the great information afterwards. Thanks, Colin.
Yeah, thank you, Blake. And I appreciate you being willing to kind of do the whole thing over again as an encore for the TUG. I'm sure a lot of us here will be really interested to join and watch that. So keep an eye on your emails for kind of that event to come out. I'm guessing we'll probably do it within a month of Tableau conference. So it'll be a little bit sooner than the typical TUG schedule. So just something to keep an eye out for. Okay, share my screen again. And next, I have the distinct honor of welcoming Frank Elavsky to the TUG today. Frank is a PhD student and researcher at the Human-Computer Interaction Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, which sounds very fancy, and a consultant whose past collaborations include with Apple's Human-Centered Machine Learning Research Group, with Microsoft, Project Jupyter, Visa, and others. Frank has really made his way around. And his work really lies at the intersection of data interaction and accessibility. So making analytical work more accessible for and alongside people with disabilities. His projects include Chartability, which is a framework for helping practitioners evaluate inaccessible visualizations. It's a resource that I am constantly recommending to our consultants and teaching folks about when they're interested in Data Viz Accessibility. But he's also created Data Navigator, which is a tool that helps creators make interactive visualizations more accessible for users of assistive technologies. And then on top of all of that, he advises the Accessible Rich Internet Applications, or ARIA, if you've heard of that, standards working group as an invited expert in data visualization. So I literally cannot think of a better person to be talking to us at the Accessibility TUG. I'm really excited for what Frank has to say. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Frank.
Thanks, Colin. It's kind of funny. I can't remember the last time I've talked to a group that has this many folks who are like already meeting and doing things related to accessibility and visualization, which is pretty cool. In some ways, this might be a basic talk, but I've been really working in the past couple of years actually to improve talks that I give in ways that aren't just practical, but also have like a little bit of theory or, kind of concepts included as well. So a little bit of teaching as well as like, practical stuff. So this is kind of a talk format I've been trying to get better at. And yeah, this is a perfect test group, I think. Some of it's probably just going to be stuff all of you are like, oh yeah, we've been talking about that for a long time. And then other things maybe hopefully is a little intellectually stimulating. So at least that's what I'm hoping for.
Well, we're happy to give you the opportunity, Frank. And I just wanted to mention before you get too much into it that we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have questions, hold on to them, and we'll do a Q&A at the end of the presentation.
And Colin, remind me, we're doing just perfect on time, right? Because it'll be 30 minutes and then 15 at the end.
Yep, we're doing perfect.
Awesome. I'm going to set a timer so I stay on. Cool. Yeah. So, by the way, super generous introduction. Thank you so much. I actually, it's interesting to hear, Blake, I'm super stoked about navigation. And that's something I've hoped for Tableau for a long time. And navigation was actually the first public talk I gave on accessibility. I gave a private one to like a small group before that, but it was the first public talk I ever gave was on navigation. And I learned a lot from that talk. I just jumped right in. It was super advanced. And I think I like maybe melted people's brains. But yeah, I've learned a lot over the years. And actually it was the motivation to have introductory materials like this made. So I think that's super cool that you're going to present on that. So I'm stoked. Yeah, so jumping right in. It's so funny. I'm going to immediately stop sharing my screen, but it's okay. I'm going to jump on. Some of you have probably already seen this video, but I've used it so many times over the years because it's perfect. I think I like to just start by showing what an inaccessible experience could actually be like for folks. So let me reshare my screen now. Give me a second.
Image. 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 One face. Image.
So I'll pause it there. And what we're seeing here is this is a mobile device, and it is using a mobile screen reader to navigate a data visualization of the election results from the US 2020 presidential elections. And we see kind of a focus indication, which is that like thick white outline around the state of Nebraska right there in the center of the US. But the only thing that's being actually read out to a screen reader is just the word image repeatedly, which obviously is not great. I think that what we're presenting here visually is at least the state, so Nebraska, and who won it or the status of it. So there's at least 6 statuses that are shown, Biden, lead, win, flip, Trump, same 3, flip, win, lead. And that information that's encoded should at least be shown to the user. I always think this is such an interesting example because actually to have something navigable is kind of hard. But so somebody did something to make this navigable to some degree, but didn't finish the job by adding descriptions for a screen reader to actually read out. So it's really curious. I also think, somebody came in here and designed intentionally what that focus indication looks like, that thick outline. That's not something that just happens, by default. It's not like the screen reader is doing that. A designer chose to do that. So I think this is great. It's also a great demonstration of kind of how much can actually be involved in accessibility. So I like to set this as a stage that doing accessibility work is still actually kind of hard. It doesn't have to be. The future can be brighter. We all can participate in making accessibility work easier because somebody, I think, went halfway and, for some reason or another, didn't carry the torch to the finish line. So Back to my materials. Ooh. Oh, it's going to make me, sorry. It's making me close my Keynote before I share, which is super weird. Okay. And we're back in. So that's kind of like, oh, it was embedded. Oh, you probably all don't hear that though. So that's what it is, but as a demonstration, but like the word, what do we mean when we say accessibility? It actually has several definitions. The first is just a pretty broad definition, the qualities that make an experience open or usable to all people. And that definition is actually less common than the more specific definition, which is the qualities that make an experience open or usable, specifically for people with disabilities. Both uses of the term accessibility are obviously fine. There's nothing wrong with either one. But I, of course, focus solely on that second area. The first might be like, you may use the word accessibility in a sentence. I'm making data science more accessible for high school students. And that really just means, probably improving the materials or making them easier or, preparing them in a way that engages high school students. But why do we do this work? I don't have chat open. I'm not going to engage chat too much. Sometimes I really engage the audience when I do this. This would be a time where I actually try and get people to guess why we do it. But the real question here is, why do we do it? I'm talking to folks right now, all of you who I assume make data visualizations. Why do you do accessibility work? Why don't we have just specialists do this work, or just the people with disabilities? Why don't they kind of, do their own work? It's a pretty complicated space to answer, but and we'll get to I'll really flesh this question out later, because I think it's probably the most important question. And at the end of the day, a lot of us, we may go into business environments and we have to argue with people who have budgets why we should do this work. And it's good to have some great reasons that you can use in those conversations, and a broad number of reasons, right? There is no, I think, simple single answer that always works. There is one simple answer that I think is the best answer, but it doesn't always work depending on who you're talking to. The best answer is, of course, that accessibility is a recognized human right internationally. It's literally the morally and ethically correct thing to do. We should just do it. But of course, some folks, whether or not something's a human right, they may be just, evaluating the risk to their business and the cost of making something accessible, and arguing, well, maybe we can get away with not doing it. And in those cases, it's a good argument to say, well, actually, a quarter of all people who live in the United States, over a quarter now, this number has gone up over the years, 27% of people in the US alone self-report living with a disability that affects their daily life. And internationally, that number is higher. Access to healthcare is directly, socioeconomic conditions are directly related to disability. And so folks who have less access to healthcare, you see more disability prevalent. And so disability is also really broad, right? Color vision deficiency, that's people, color blindness, just over 4% of people have that. Blindness and low vision as a collective category is about 4.5%. Cognitive and neurological disability, which includes like autism and ADHD, as well as a wide range of other things. Motor and dexterity related disabilities, that's the largest category. So mobility and getting around using your upper and lower bodies to do things and move, that is largely due to aging. We will all probably experience that in our lifetime for sure. Hopefully we all get old and live a long life. And then vestibular and motion stuff. So that's like motion sickness and other things related to that sort of neurological set of conditions. But all of these actually influence our work, right? we tend to sort of think of accessibility, oh, it's just for people who are blind, because we're sort of biased, right? We do data visualization, we're thinking visual, we're thinking who's most excluded, people who can't see. So color vision deficiency and blindness have been a big focus. And it's great, we should focus on that stuff. But actually, all this other stuff, we also should focus on, and it's part of accessibility work. And so I like to kind of talk about accessibility and why it's important by talking about like the whole category of disability all at once, because you get in trouble when you start like putting a dollar figure to making something accessible just for people who are blind. I think the most successful cases I've had when making a case for a budget have been this right here. A quarter of all people live with a disability, and we should just do this work because it's good for business. But also, it will make you better at data visualization design, because actually a lot of these considerations intersect with just what good design is. So I like to talk about the different ways that people do accessibility work by kind of also having this really silly diagram of like how we make stuff. It's going to be crude, but I kind of like it. So I've used it for quite a while now. I haven't given up on this diagram yet. But creators use tools to make things. And as time goes on, we get more and more things. So creators, that would be all of you. We use tools. So in this case, probably mostly talking about Tableau, but other stuff too. We use all kinds of tools, sometimes even lower tech than we might assume, but we use stuff to make things. So Data Viz, dashboards, analytical environments, whatever. And it turns out, of course, as time goes on, there's more of that stuff out there. And this kind of introduces a whole set of different sort of problems and challenges when it comes to doing accessibility. This area of just stuff that currently exists, it's not looking good out there for accessibility. So a group called WebAIM, which is basically the group that part of the W3C that heads accessibility. They do a survey of the top 1 million web pages, home pages, every year, and just for like a few simple, really easy to detect accessibility barriers. And 97 to 99% of these home pages have at least one critical accessibility barrier that's easily detectable. So very likely, pretty much every page out there has something that's not great about it. And this trend hasn't necessarily gotten significantly better over the years. Like we've gone from 99 down to 97 over. So, I should update the numbers to 2024. It's really only gone down about 2% in 5 years, which isn't good. But people do work at every stage here when it comes to accessibility, and we can too, right? Researchers often dream of ideal futures. Researchers like myself will try and maybe build things that we're hoping and anticipating for better stuff down the road, better user experiences, dreaming not just of removing present barriers, but experiences that are enabling and empowering. And then, of course, there's quite a lot of work that focuses on how do we just fix the stuff we currently have. A lot of accessibility consulting is in that space. So are like projects in machine learning are very common to try and like fix stuff at scale. And then tools and tool building, that actually is where I have focused most of my work on through my professional career is, I worked at Visa, we made Visa chart components. And so we wanted a solid design system set of data visualization components that just helped make it really easy to make accessible data visualizations. And then, of course, the creators end of things is actually just usually about education. It's about standards. It's about, social, legal, and other kind of factors that influence, all of us. And a lot of that work is important and good to do too. So yeah, there's a lot of ways, if you're wondering how to get involved, you can get involved. So our first concept we're going to talk about today is the social versus medical models of disability. This is a curb. The curb's not the concept, but actually the curb helps introduce a problem. which is that they're inaccessible. They pose a barrier to people who use wheelchairs. And historically speaking, the medical model, frames the cause of disability or locates disability on the body of the person according to some sort of normative standards, like you should have legs that work a certain way. And if you don't, you're disabled. But that doesn't help us fix this current issue. Innovation that uses this model always attempts to cure or augment the person's body, or existing assistive technologies, like make a wheelchair go up and down stairs. Those things are usually like a couple £1,000 and cost like $10,000. They're really impractical. And automated legs are also like super expensive as well, and often do not work well because they're just research prototypes. But in the social model, the framing is actually that the curb is the source of disability. It is where disability is produced because it is a barrier. And in the social model, it's called the social model because we made stuff and we should be responsible for solving that stuff. This goes back to, why do we do it? Why is the onus on creators to make sure the things we create are accessible? Because of the social model. In the social model of disability, you would not say Mount Everest is inaccessible in the same way that you would say a curb is inaccessible. Mount Everest isn't necessarily man-made. Maybe trails or other things along Mount Everest are, but the curb is entirely made by us people, and therefore we should be the ones to fix stuff. This introduces kind of our next concept called ability assumptions. This is some research by Wabrock et al. This term is used a lot in research spaces, but I think it's actually really good for anybody designing. When we design, we kind of assume users in our head, and we assume systems should fit those users. So you see the curve on this shape of user fits the curve on the system. But it turns out some users don't fit the system because the system wasn't made for them. So we introduce an adaptation, like a screen reader, for example, fits this model. But that puts the burden on the user to acquire these adaptations, learn how to use them, implement them, and then interact with the system. That's not ideal. But there actually are other ways to design where you build systems that are capable of adapting to users. And that puts the burden on the system, which is great. I think that this is a good space of design. And I think that all of us should be thinking about our own ability assumptions in our own work. For example, a curb assumes the ability, human ability to step up and during locomotion also move forward. But a cut curb has fewer exclusive ability assumptions. So it's just a more inclusive design for that reason. And we can do this stuff in our own work as well. This helps introduce our kind of final concept for the day called situational impairment. I love this one. This one was actually when my advisor at CMU said some light bulbs went on in his head, because it sort of personalizes things a bit. But there's a dimension to disability we often don't think about, and that is time. So someone might permanently lose or not have an arm. So they permanently just have one arm. But also, you could fall and break your arm. And so temporarily, you will only have use of one arm. And of course, there could be situations where maybe you're carrying something, or one hand is busy and you're multitasking with a second hand. In all of these cases, making something accessible for someone who has a permanent disability will have downstream effects for everyone else. And this is related to the curb cut effect. This has been kind of a big push, I think, in the last 15, 20 years, especially in business contexts, because it turns out that doing accessibility work actually just benefits everyone. That earlier number, a quarter of all people have a disability. Well, 100% of all people experience temporary and situational impairments. We do, even today. I often talk about how my phone doesn't automatically adjust contrast anymore. And now the sun, a really bright location, is actually a situational impairment for me because my screen doesn't brighten anymore. I can't use my phone easily. So this kind of philosophy is called Design for One, Extend to All. It's part of Microsoft's, I at least got these materials from Microsoft's Inclusive Design 101 toolkit. Yeah, it's good work. You should check it out for sure. But there are some limits to Design for One, Extend to All. Primarily, oh, I forget that I talk about this final concept. It's not really a concept. The final thing I want to talk about is really disability-centered design work. This dates back actually to the original 504 sit-in, which was advocates pushing for all kinds of reform. In particular, disability advocates, people with disabilities in particular, wanted laws and rules that shaped cities to actually include them. Like the lawmakers include them in the lawmaking, consult with them, and make sure that the laws or regulations or whatever actually make sense and are actually good. Because a lot of people are doing things behind closed doors. So that push was kind of the first really big disability-centered push. And it led, of course, to the ADA, and pretty much every major kind of regulation we have presently for disability and accessibility. So one thing, though, that's a downside, though, is that curb cut work has been prioritized in business spaces. If something can extend to everyone, that's the sort of accessibility work we do first. But it's important to note that actually there is a lot of stuff that will not extend to people with temporary or situational impairments, but is still really good. In particular, when it comes to maps, for example, tactile maps that use Braille are extraordinarily effective for people who are blind and can read Braille, but the Braille, of course, does not extend to other people because you need to know Braille. So sometimes it is still good to design even if there isn't an extension, right? Because at the heart of what we're doing, it's about human rights. It's not always about our personal stake in accessibility or the fact that sometimes accessibility work has downstream effects. So lastly, in these last 9 minutes that I have on my little timer here, we'll just talk about some basic ways to evaluate accessibility. So this is yet again a different US 2020 presidential election map. And in other more hands-on, really in-depth workshops that I give, we fully evaluate this thing across all of Chartability's 50 criteria. We're just going to go through sort of the most important, biggest impact things here that I hope all of you can at least practice. And this is where I assume there will be some lessons that y'all already know quite well. But when I do this in about an hour, we find usually about 1,000 accessibility barriers. So it just goes to show that doing this work, it might seem really intimidating, but you can get pretty good at it if you just practice it. Because in an hour of work, finding this many things to improve in your designs is actually really productive. It's great to have somebody on your team who knows how to do this. Or as a consultant, this will help you get some work very seriously. So the first kind of category of things we'll be thinking about are perceivable things. And the simple way to think about this category of tests is just asking, can somebody perceive this data visualization in multiple ways? And is each way that they can perceive it easy? An example, of course, is designing with high contrast or a minimum level of contrast. The text on the left is low contrast. So are the data visualization elements. And on the right, it's much higher contrast. It's far easier to perceive. And you can actually check contrast ratios using an online tool. There's a lot of these, but you want to look for one that uses WCAG. That's just the accessibility standard. So that's WCAG. You can also just Google accessibility contrast checker, and most of them are probably the correct ones to use. Also, don't rely on color alone in your designs. I think most people in accessibility and data visualization already know this. We talk about this all the time. But on the far left, we have two lines in a data visualization. The top one is a little bit greener. The bottom one is a little bit more purple. But if you're green blind, they both look kind of purpley. So this will be 1% of min. is probably 1% of men primarily of European ancestry. But on the right, it's been redesigned so that the greener line actually has a redundant encoding. It uses texture and color. So it's got those dotted lines. And then the purplier line gets to be solid. So having a difference in more than just color is really important when encoding categories and other things. And of course, adult text. So going back to the very first demo I showed, the only thing that was really missing from that map was just a short little description for each state of what was going on there. Writing alt text is actually quite an art. Doing it well can be hard. So just practice it. It's just like writing as a skill. But writing alt text can probably also help you design better, because you're thinking about, why did I make this? What was the whole reason? What was the thing I wanted to say? And the next category of things is operable. Same framing of questions here, right? Can someone operate this data visualization in multiple ways, and is each way easy? So a lot of assistive technologies actually navigate. So going back to very likely what Blake will be talking about, assistive input technologies don't all use a pointer, which is like precise touching with our fingers or with a mouse. A lot of them actually navigate content. And in fact, some of the oldest assistive technologies we have are navigational ones. So this is a desk-mounted sip and puff device. It's called the Possum, and it's been around since the 60s. So this is somebody who navigates and uses a computer with breathing patterns. And a lot of AT, that's assistive technologies, rely on an underlying navigable structure to stuff. Most relies on the keyboard. And in fact, almost all of them do, except for stuff that's like voice input or direct navigation stuff. But try the keyboard test, which is you just don't use your mouse. If there's an interactive dashboard and there's anything interactive about it, try and see if you can do that stuff with just your keyboard. Because if you can't, then somebody who uses an assistive technology likely cannot also. And it's the most important test. Just literally just this is like so many barriers can be caught just doing that. The final category we're going to talk about is understandable. So we've talked about perceivable. Can people perceive something in multiple ways, and is each way easy? Operable. If there's something usable about the data visualization, can somebody use it in multiple ways, and is each way easy? Now, lastly, this is what I think is really at the heart of why we visualize data in the first place. We visualize data because data is hard for human brains to understand. We're just not good at looking at a million rows in a table and thinking anything meaningful out of that. But when we visualize, it makes stuff much easier to understand. So really, we are making data more accessible to sighted people by visualizing that data. And now we need to think, how can we also make data and the visualization easier to understand and provide multiple ways to understand? And one of the easiest things you can do is, if you have any text summary or any vocabulary at all, you can actually usually rephrase it to be much more readable with a lower grade reading level. You're supposed to keep things at grade 9 or below. And you can use the Hemingway editor to kind of test anything you write. And it gives you kind of a grade testing based on kind of some standard stuff. Some people have used ChatGPT to summarize things as well. But whatever you do, you always want to edit anything that you write to make sure that there isn't information loss, and you're still communicating your point, but it's just clearer and easier to use. And this tool is also free. I love the Hemingway editor. So another thing, which I'm not going to put on here, but I think it's something that's kind of built into Tableau, which can be really problematic, is this is just making it easier to understand. But a different way to perceive a data visualization is to provide a table of that data visualization, of the underlying data. And sometimes in Tableau, especially if you're doing pretty elaborate or complex things to the data or to the visualization itself, like you're computing some geometry and you're using like you're pre-computing in the data, that data isn't really going to be useful to most people. So for Tableau people in particular, I really want to stress that making a like human readable, human usable table of your data visualizations is like an area y'all should definitely try to focus on. Like check your data table exports at the end. Consider ways of making like simpler data sets than just the ones you might use to like visualize something in a really rich way. But yeah, so this is an intro to Chartability. And these are just like a few tests from each of these first three kind of categories. There's other categories, so we only went through the first three. There's 7 total, and there are 50 total tests in Chartability you can look out for. But the ones I went over, I've done about 130,000, probably actually more than that now, tests with Chartability over the years. And the things I've talked about here are the most common failures. So, and they're also pretty significant in their impact, right? High contrast is such a common failure that people just use low contrast in text or whatever. And it's so easy to fix. You can even automatically just check your text and fix it. Redundant encoding is also something that's surprisingly common, even though sometimes I like to think we all think about color blindness in Data Viz accessibility. It's still actually pretty common that's not the case. So you can find these slides as well as other slides from other presentations I've given, including more in-depth stuff with like a deeper dive and more things, including recorded videos at my website, which is frank.computer. And of course, I'll probably just drop that link into chat. Yeah, so I guess Q&A time.
Awesome. Thank you, Frank. It's really helpful to like know that you've done all these different tests, right? There's all these different things that you could possibly check, but then know that, okay, like here are the most important ones, or like here are the things that I see that cause the biggest barriers to the most amount of people. It's really helpful to have kind of your perspective and experience there.
Yeah, that actually, so when I first developed Chartability, I involved a bunch of people with disabilities to come together and also just say personally, what are the biggest barriers for them? Like the things that are just cause the most impact. And some of them, like high contrast, they're easy to fix. Yeah. Like that's not hard to hit the minimum contrast. And it has a significant impact for people. So yeah, it's not just the tests I've done for what things are common, but also like early work with people to kind of like define like these are a set of things that like have high impact as a barrier if we don't fix them.
Yeah. So if you have questions for Frank, Emily opened up the Q&A function in the video chat, so you can find it around the bottom of your screen. There's a button that says Q&A, and you can open that up, see the questions that have been asked. If there's ones that you feel like you particularly want answered, you can upvote it, or you can type in your own at the bottom. And we basically have the next 15 minutes to ask Frank whatever we want. Well, maybe within reason. I guess I'll start with the top voted one, which is one of mine. And it kind of has to do with what we were just talking about. So since there's no perfectly accessible data visualization, how do you decide how accessible is accessible enough for a particular situation?
Yeah, I think this is to me actually a social question because it gets at the heart of the fact that there are people building stuff, and we often have deadlines, and we have resources that may or may not be available to us that we would need in order to do a particular hit a particular like level of finesse or standard or whatever. And I think that the real thing that kind of plagues accessibility work is actually burnout. It's not. It's the number one thing that I think really hurts practitioners over time. And I'm concerned with that in the big picture because I want people to just keep doing this work and not lose hope or have their hearts get crushed. And so My simple answer is it's enough if you've done your best and you've done something. And just do what you can. In different orgs, there will be different levels that may be actually pretty formalized that you should meet. And that in particular, like if you work for the federal government, you have literal standards you need to comply with. So I would do that stuff, just try and do that. But always think about how can you make this work easier for yourself in the future and for others who follow you, right? A lot of what we do in data visualization is we will build things that could generalize to future work. We do some analysis that we might copy and paste into our next analysis. Think that way in terms of copy pasting. Copy paste your past accessibility work into your future stuff too, and think how copy pastable is my current accessibility work. Can I like just write a couple lines of code, like think about this for an hour and save time, like save myself 20 hours down the road. Organizations that are very successful with accessibility that I've consulted with always have this strategy in mind. They're doing the best they can right now and also reserving a little bit of time as an investment for future time saving. So yeah. And don't burn out. Like, just be easy on yourself, especially if you're alone, you're like the only accessibility person doing work. Just do your best. Like, situations can be complicated. So yeah, good question. Super good first question.
Right.
Yeah.
And remember that you're not alone, right? We've got over 50 people on this call that also care about it. So even if you feel like you're the lone voice in your organization, there's other people out there that care about this too, and that you can tap if you're interested in getting a second opinion.
Yeah.
Mo, I saw you put your hand up.
Yeah, this is a great session. I mean, this is the first time I'm coming in. I have been in the BI space for a long time. I've never come across this much of compliance for accessibility for users. My question directly to Frank, being an industry expert and being a subject matter expert, how do you compare Tableau accessibility support on the platform as compared to the other platform like Microsoft or other analytics tools, right?
Yeah, so great question. I came out with an article where I, based on my experience consulting, have some data on that. And not great, but Tableau has changed since I last did that. And also there is actual like research on this. If y'all give me a minute, I can try and Google it really quick and drop it in chat. But in general, Tableau has some kind of proprietary layering. In particular, for example, you weren't able to easily make marks in a visualization navigable, and Power BI lets you do that, right? And you can even customize some stuff about that in Power BI. And Power BI is like pushing towards sonification now, so there's some other stuff in that other groups are dreaming of beyond just how do we make a visualization accessible, but how do we really make data accessible, which I think is a pretty significant shift that some companies are starting to make. I'm hopeful for Tableau though. I mean, like Tableau has awesome people working on it. Not that Power BI doesn't, but I think that there's some really good stuff that's come out lately that I think is shifting. But yeah.
Can I weigh in?
Yeah, go for it. While you talk, I'm going to go Google really quick. Hold on.
Yeah. So I just looked at, I would agree with Frank that I think Power BI from a functionality perspective at this point probably does have the lead in terms of how accessible they're making their visualizations. And I think part of that is just the amount of work in their ecosystem, right? So they have accessibility checkers in Excel and Word and PowerPoint, and I believe in Power BI as well. And so, and they have that inclusive design toolkit that Frank referenced at the beginning. So they already have a very, in my opinion, deep history with trying to be inclusive with their ecosystem, or because their ecosystem is so large. Having said that, I was just looking at Tableau, Pyramid Analytics, and SAS Visual Analytics. And of those three, I looked at different aspects of it. And I think Tableau is the more accessible of those three. And part of that also is the community support and the direction in which they're headed. but I'm still kind of doing my work on that. So I haven't like fully, like I'm probably about 80% done with the SAS visual analytics, and Pyramid has a lot of opportunity. So that's just what I've done recently on the platform comparisons.
Thank you both. I do have another follow-up question. So based on what you guys just shared, do you guys believe that companies or customers or organizations who have a responsibility for delivering these dashboard for IOTA compliance dashboard, they should follow certain best practices, or because like I work for a public sector in Toronto, Canada. We have a very large customer for Tableau. I think these guys are the single largest in Canada using Tableau, and they're part of the government, so they have to follow and act and deliver according to that. And what I've found that their team, like accessibility team, is pretty large, and they, whenever I ask them, what's your checklist for accessing a dashboard, what is your best practices, they just don't give enough information. So my question to both of you is like something you guys also covering on your seminars, that people should follow these framework or these checklists when they are hiring people to build those dashboard, and once they are onboarded, what things they should look for without just butchering a vendor?
Yeah, big question. There's a lot to that. I think the short answer is I put together Chartability for this reason. So it's 50 things that you should do to make data visualizations, including interactive data visualizations like a dashboard, more accessible. So that's a great resource. So I'll drop that in chat also. But I think that there's a couple layers to compliance and how compliance compares to access. They're not always synonymous. Oftentimes companies, especially tools, will do something that technically could allow users to create something that is accessible, but it may be very hard to do, or it may not be like a common path, or it may conflict with other things you might also want to do for accessibility or otherwise. But those companies are technically compliant, or their product is technically compliant. And that's not ideal, right? So there is always going to be work, I think, to finesse our tools to actually be helpful and have a lot of robust potential. So when I rate tools, I rate them on terms of how much accessibility do they offer out of the box that's like just ready to go. It's just things that it's done automatically or extremely easy. But also how well can that tool adapt to pretty complex requirements, because that's often something that will limit really what makes something accessible and good, like a good thing, a good tool or dashboard or whatever down the road. So yeah, I posted links to the article that I wrote. It's a whole book on accessibility and visualization that the Urban Institute put together. It rules. I have a chapter in there on tools specifically. Then there's also research that they did a comparative analysis of how accessible different tools are in terms of what they can offer you. So that's good for anybody who's just curious about more than just Tableau stuff, how do all these things compare.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank.
Yeah.
We're coming towards the end of our time, and there's a nice question in the Q&A from Jennifer that might help just kind of wrap things up, which is just, what are some ways to promote accessibility? I know you talked about sort of using that 27% statistic as kind of a helpful one, but I guess, do you have others that you have seen be successful?
Yeah, promoting. It's tough, I think. There are some companies I've worked with where they're actually pushing for DEI, so like a DEI initiative, and people have made proposals. So say a DEI budget gets put together, and somebody then is like, oh, this is a good opportunity because part of inclusion, disability is related to DEI efforts. They may get funding, to say bring in an outside contractor or build up the team skills or whatever. And so looking for like actual financial opportunities is sometimes the best way to promote internally in an org what you're doing. Externally, like outside an org, it's a mess right now. I would say Twitter, maybe like 2 years ago, is just a great way to connect to people. The Data Viz Society and the Ally, like kind of group, it's a large like kind of community org. They both have Slack channels that are actually awesome and they have things, sub channels specific to accessibility and Viz. So I would say like promoting stuff there is good. Connecting to peers in kind of a social context like LinkedIn or something else is still pretty good too. Yeah, I don't know. That's a hard question. It's maybe the ultimate question because like people just knowing about this stuff is like maybe the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, well, that's all the time we have today for the tug. So we start and end on time. I want to share my screen one more time to show you if you're interested in being a presenter at the tug. We're always looking for people who are interested in presenting on their work using accessibility in Tableau or just accessibility generally. So you can either scan that QR code on your screen, or you can fill in the sign up at till.bi/allytug, which is A11YTUG. And we have a presenter sign up form there. So I would definitely recommend doing that if you're interested, or you can always just reach out to me. That's fine too. All right, well, with that, we are going to wrap up for the day. It's been wonderful to have you all here. Special thanks, particularly to Frank, for all of your insight. I mean, wonderful presentation. It's been wonderful to get to know you over the last month or two, as well as we've been planning this out. And you know that you are always more than welcome to test any presentations here at the Accessibility Tug.
Seriously, thank you. This was a treat. I actually wish we had more time for the Q&A because some of the questions are really good. As a note, you can convert keynote presentations just like an online converter. Like I think Google even can do it. Like you can open in Google Slides and then download as PowerPoint or something. So just a note on that one. Just, format changing. But yeah, seriously, thank you. I do hope to come back someday. Maybe, try out a new talk. I am working on some kind of weird stuff right now, so it would be fun to talk about. Maybe slightly impractical, but fun. So
yeah, I think we're here for it.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
And we'll
Thank
see you
you,
next
Frank.
time.
Thanks.